Iowa Republican, your first speech, a very different kind of joint session speech. What did you think?
Well, having seen it on television before, of course, it was much more sparsely populated in the chamber. But I don't think that took away from the warm reception that President Biden had when he came into the chambers and throughout his speech. I mean, he greeted members of both the House and the Senate. They also greeted him, both sides of the aisle, both parties. And I think the speech was well delivered, and it had a very even tone, very affable. And I think hopefully the unity and the bipartisanship that he spoke about will be something that will come true.
Where were you seated?
So I was seated behind Liz Cheney.
And was there something that he said tonight that sparked a mood of bipartisanship? Do you think your party and the Democrats can work on some of these issues?
Well, I think certainly when he talked about the vaccines, I mean, President Trump delivered for us a vaccine within 9 months, which is miraculous. Being in the medical profession and a former state director of public health, I can tell you that that's a tremendously remarkable achievement. But then to be able to ramp that up, get vaccines into the arms of individuals and get up to 200 million doses, he certainly exceeded what his timeline was. And so I think that was something that all of us, felt comfortable with, and we thought is an achievement that should be applauded. So I think we agreed on those things. When he talked about infrastructure, when it comes to roads and bridges and broadband and the electric grid, locks and dams on the Mississippi, that's important to my area especially. I think there's bipartisan agreement on those issues, but when you have 75% of a bill that does not go to infrastructure as people think about it, there's concern about that.
But he said, for example, with electric cars, we need to compete with China, that we're not doing that. That's why it's in the infrastructure bill.
Well, I think it's interesting when you're talking about competing with China that you have a president that on the first day in office signed an executive order to get rid of the Keystone Pipeline, which eliminated 11,000 jobs immediately, which also takes us from being a country that was energy independent and exporting oil and natural gas, and shifts in electric and enhancing electric car vehicles. Solar panels are made in China. Rare earth elements come from China. They have horrible environmental practices and horrible labor practices. So I think it's interesting to talk about that. Also, when we're talking about made in the USA and competing with China, the masks that we were given to wear into the chambers today were made in China. So I would like to see a little bit more of, walking the talk, not just talking the talk.
Why was that? The masks that you were given made in China?
The masks we were given were made in China, and I personally know of companies in my district that retooled their facility to make masks and to make shells during the pandemic. So we know that these things are sourced in the United States. We've talked about diversifying our supply chain, not being reliant on China, and I think it's a very small thing, but it's something that people noticed.
You're a member of Congress, a new member of Congress, but also trained as a doctor and a public health expert. So where do you see the country this summer and fall with regard to COVID, based on what you heard tonight, based on what the president said where we are and where he sees us moving ahead?
Well, I certainly think that the pandemic is something that we had to take very seriously, which we have done. We now have a vaccine, so we're seeing our economy open up, our schools open up, which I think schools were delayed opening for far too long, given the CDC guidelines, given the safety. But I think we're coming out of the pandemic. I think that we are very close to herd or community immunity. So I think when you're looking at, for instance, what comes out of Israel with 50% or 90% of people over age 50 have been vaccinated and they have removed all their restrictions, I think that we can look towards what's happened in Israel and see that can also be possible in the United States. But absolutely, we need to get everybody vaccinated.
And if I'm not mistaken, you had the very narrowest majority in your victory in Iowa, correct, as a member of Congress?
I did. I had a very narrow victory, but...
How many votes?
6 votes.
And so where does that put you in terms of working with Democrats? Do you feel you're in a different position than somebody who might be from a stronger district that would vote Democrat or Republican one way or the other?
Actually, my district is a district that's a purple district, so it already is a purple district, and there are already bills that I have advanced, both bipartisan and bicameral. And so I'm looking forward to looking for those things where we can reach common ground and we can move ahead. So, for instance, infrastructure when it comes to roads and bridges, locks and dams, broadband, and the electric grid, I think those are things that we can all work together on. We all have good ideas and we can advance in that agenda. And I really am hopeful that we'll be able to come, past this point where we are, where there's been little bipartisanship, that we can get on a more bipartisan footing.
Only about 200 tickets to get to the speech tonight. Did you ask for one, and where were you seated?
I did not ask for one, so we were invited, which I was very fortunate to be invited. I was seated about the fourth row back, and I was seated behind Liz Cheney. And so I had a good seat, and I was very honored to be invited to the speech, to the State of the Union speech. I think it's important to respect the office of the presidency, regardless of who occupies that office.
Representative Miller-Meeks from Iowa, we thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.